The strangest and most inexplicable thing that happened to me at night. This story happened to me 3 years ago, but the feeling of that evening still keeps me on edge, as if it all happened just yesterday. It was an ordinary summer day that smoothly transitioned into a calm, almost sleepy night. I had returned home after a long day at work. The evening lights of the city, seeping through the curtains, seemed warm and cozy. Back then, I couldn't have imagined that this night would become the most terrifying of my life. My apartment was small, but rather cozy: 2 rooms, a kitchen, and a tiny balcony overlooking a quiet courtyard. Everything around seemed usual, routine. I turned on my favorite playlist, brewed some green tea, and sat at my computer to watch a few YouTube videos before bed. I didn't even notice how quickly time flew by, and the clock showed 11:47 p.m. I decided it was time to sleep. Before going to bed, I did my usual round of the apartment, checking the locks on the doors and windows. It was my little habit, almost a ritual. The last stop was the balcony. The curtain was slightly ajar, and through it, I could see the courtyard dimly lit by streetlights. Everything was quiet, but just as I was about to close the balcony door, something in my field of vision made me freeze. Down below, near a bench, stood a figure, dark, motionless. At first glance, it looked like a person, but something about its silhouette unsettled me. It was like a strange contrast. Everything in the courtyard obeyed the rules of light and shadow, yet this figure seemed separate, as if it didn't belong to this place. I stood for a few seconds, trying to make out more details, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there facing my direction. Maybe it's just one of the neighbors, I thought, trying to rationalize the situation, yet something deep inside me hinted that something was off. I closed the balcony door, drew the curtain, and lay down in bed. But sleep wouldn't come. The image of that figure kept replaying in my head. What was it doing in our courtyard at this hour? Why was it so still? My thoughts were interrupted by the quiet ticking of the old clock on the wall. Midnight. Suddenly, I heard a sound. It was a quiet creak, the sound of a door slowly opening. At first, I thought it was the neighbors. After all, in our building, the old doors creaked, and their sound could be heard even through the walls. But this creak was too close. I listened carefully. The sound came again. My heart sank. It was the creak of my balcony door. That's impossible, flashed through my mind. I was sure I had closed it. Could it be the wind? But the windows were shut. I jumped out of bed and tiptoed to the bedroom door. The hallway was dark, with only faint moonlight seeping through the curtains in the living room. I stood still, holding my breath. There were no more sounds. The silence was broken only by the occasional distant hum of cars. Summoning my courage, I took a step forward, trying to move quietly. My hand trembled as I carefully opened the bedroom door. Nothing. An empty hallway. I went to the living room. The balcony door was ajar. Maybe I didn't close it properly? I tried to reassure myself, but my heart was pounding so hard it felt like its beats could be heard by the neighbors. As I got closer, a cold draft nearly paralyzed me. On the floor near the door, I saw footprints. Wet, uneven marks that stretched from the door to the middle of the room. But the scariest part were these prints didn't look human. They had 3 elongated toes with distinct ridges, as if left by something bent in an unnatural posture. I tried to find some logical explanation, but my mind refused to process what I was seeing. The tracks stopped abruptly in the middle of the room. They didn't continue on the walls or the carpet. It was as if something had vanished as suddenly as it appeared. I locked the balcony door, checked all the locks again, and this time, I even propped the door with a chair. The thought of going back to bed seemed impossible. I sat on the couch and grabbed my phone to check the time: 12:27 a.m. Attempts to distract myself with social media were futile. Something about this night felt wrong. I was almost ready to call the police when I heard a faint, barely audible sound. It was a whisper, barely distinguishable, as if someone was trying to speak but lacked the strength. The whisper came from somewhere in the hallway, and there was something deeply unsettling about its quiet, monotonous tone. I froze. The phone's flashlight illuminated only a small part of the room, and I had to summon all my courage to step into the hallway. Step by step, with trembling hands, I approached the source of the sound. But when I peered into the darkness, what I saw made me freeze in place. I peered into the darkness of the hallway, trying to understand where the whisper was coming from. The light from my phone was too weak to illuminate more than a few feet ahead. The hallway seemed longer than usual, as if the walls had shifted and the darkness had thickened. The whisper didn't stop. It didn't sound like normal human mumbling. It was layered, as though several voices were speaking at once, each in a different language. I stopped, trying to collect my thoughts. What is this? What's going on? Maybe I had already fallen asleep, and this was just a nightmare? But the cold draft of air, the sticky fear, and the pounding of my heart told me the moment was real. I decided to investigate. I took a few more steps forward and shone my flashlight ahead. The hallway was empty. The whisper, however, was now coming from behind me. My heart clenched in my chest, and I quickly turned around. Nothing. I began to panic. Unable to bear it, I turned on the hallway light, expecting to see someone or something. But all I saw was my own reflection in the mirror by the entrance. A trembling hand clutching the phone and a pale face. But something in the reflection made me pause. It wasn't right. There was some barely noticeable detail that was unsettling. I stared at myself, trying to understand what was off, when I saw it. My reflection in the mirror was moving slightly differently. A fraction of a second behind me, almost imperceptible, but enough to send a chill down my spine. I took a step back, and my reflection, remaining still for a moment, also took a step but in the opposite direction. A wave of panic washed over me. I dashed out of the hallway into the living room, turned on every light I could, and stood in the middle of the room, trying to make sense of what was happening. Seconds felt like eternity. I sat on the couch, clutching my phone, when suddenly the lights began to flicker. At first, it was brief flashes, but then the lamps went out completely. Darkness enveloped me. The whisper started again. This time, it was much closer. I could hear it shifting, becoming louder, more aggressive, but the most terrifying thing was that it didn't seem external. I felt as though the voices were inside my head. I jumped up and ran to the balcony doors, trying to open them, but they wouldn't budge. The whisper turned into a rustling. Then I heard heavy footsteps approaching from the hallway. An instinctive surge of fear made me hide. I crawled under the table in the corner of the living room, trying to hold my breath. In the silence, I could hear only my own heartbeat. The footsteps came closer and stopped in the middle of the room. I couldn't see who or what was there, but I felt its presence. The tension was unbearable. Suddenly, I saw a shadow fall near me. Large, unnaturally bent, it stretched across the floor toward my hiding place. Holding my breath, I shut my eyes. Time seemed to stop, but when I heard the voice, my heart nearly burst. "You looked?" The voice was deep, distorted, and strangely familiar, though I couldn't place where I had heard it before. I felt the air around me grow heavy, and the whisper returned, blending with the voice, which seemed to engulf me. I don't know how long the nightmare lasted. Maybe a minute, maybe an eternity. But then everything suddenly stopped. The lights came back on, and the room was empty. No shadows, no footprints, just me, frozen under the table. I stood up, looked around, and froze. On the mirror in the hallway, something was written in long, crooked letters. "You saw. Now it will come again." The next few days, I didn't leave my apartment. I checked all the doors and windows, but nothing strange happened again. Nothing, except for the feeling that someone was watching me. 3 years have passed, but every night, when I lock the balcony doors, I see the same footprints. Always in the same place. Always vanishing in the middle of the room.